and had warned that silence would be a mistake. As online theories about Archie and Lilibet grew louder and more disturbing, it became clear that the royal family's refusal to speak was no longer harmless. The children, kept deliberately out of view, became symbols used to question legitimacy, divide loyalties, and erode public trust. The issue wasn't simply about curiosity. It was about a dangerous lack of clarity in a world that thrives on speculation. When the palace finally responded, it wasn't just an act of defense. It was a reckoning with years of institutional avoidance. The decision to publicly affirm the children's royal identity was about far more than setting the record straight. It was a measured reclaiming of narrative control in a world that had weaponized their absence. By confronting digital misinformation head-on, if you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. The monarchy acknowledged a broader truth. Leadership today means facing hard realities, even when tradition suggests silence. Protecting Archie and Lilibet from becoming casualties of adult conflict wasn't just necessary, it was overdue. And in choosing transparency over secrecy, the palace took a step toward a more responsible kind of monarchy, one that finally saw the cost of staying quiet too long. So, after years of radio silence, sidestepping questions, and watching speculation spiral out of control, the palace finally did what everyone had been waiting for. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. They spoke. Buckingham Palace issued a rare public statement confirming what had become one of the most uncomfortable, bizarre, and frankly damaging sagas in modern royal history: the identity and status of Archie and Lilibet. Yes, those children. The ones who somehow became global talking points not because of anything they did, but because the adults around them refused to give clear answers. For a family that has always taken pride in staying above the noise, this was a dramatic and very public course correction. And honestly, it was long overdue. Because let's be clear, the palace's silence wasn't just a passive communication strategy. It was a catalyst. The longer they said nothing, the more the internet filled in the blanks. And it didn't fill them with grace or nuance. It filled them with conspiracy theories, misinformation, and flat-out nonsense that turned two innocent children into subjects of mass scrutiny. This wasn't just about curiosity. It was about credibility. People didn't just want to know where the Sussex kids were. They wanted to know why no one was acknowledging them, why there were no appearances, no confirmations, no clarity. And when a centuries-old institution says nothing, people start to ask, what are they hiding? Turns out, they weren't hiding anything. But in the absence of a clear message, that didn't matter. Public perception took over. The lack of communication became its own scandal, breeding distrust and embarrassment for an institution that can't afford either. And behind the scenes, it wasn't pretty. This wasn't a unified palace front, calmly waiting for the right moment to speak. It was internal chaos, differing opinions, strategic disagreements. King Charles, newly focused on reshaping the monarchy under his reign, leaned into caution. Queen Camilla, ever media-aware, was reportedly worried about fanning the flames. Their view? Say nothing. Don't dignify rumors. Don't reward hysteria with attention. But others inside the family didn't agree. Prince William and Catherine, far more attuned to the realities of modern public life, wanted to address the issue head-on. To them, this wasn't about optics. It was about responsibility. They understood that letting children become lightning rods of conspiracy was more than a PR risk. It was morally unacceptable. Princess Anne also raised concerns. Her stance? That the silence wasn't containing the problem. It was creating one. And that by allowing these rumors to fester, the institution was handing control of the narrative over to people who didn't care about truth or consequences. And they were all right, because while the royals debated, the damage was already happening. Online communities had turned the kids into symbols, evidence of some alleged deep fracture, some scandalous truth being buried under layers of palace control. And with no one stepping in to say, this is nonsense, here are the facts, the chaos just kept growing. The monarchy has always been slow to react. That's part of the brand. But this wasn't just a slow response. It was a failure to protect, not just a family's image, but the children themselves. Eventually, the decision was made. They would respond, not emotionally, Not defensively, but clearly, strategically, and with just enough force to cut through the years of noise. The statement landed with impact. In it, Buckingham Palace formally reaffirmed Archie and Lilibet's legitimate royal status. It made clear that speculation about them was inappropriate and harmful. And most importantly, it emphasized that these were children, not public figures, not stories, not pawns, just kids, deserving of privacy, protection, and dignity. It was the kind of message that should have come a long time ago. But even late, it mattered. It worked. The reaction from media and the public was swift and overwhelmingly positive. In the UK, it was received as a serious, measured step toward restoring trust. In the US, it was seen as an overdue correction from an institution many felt had mishandled things for too long. Even skeptics acknowledged that finally addressing the issue was the right thing to do. And it wasn't just about the statement itself. It was about what it represented. This was a clear signal that the monarchy understands the stakes. That silence in the digital age isn't noble. It's dangerous. Because while tradition is important, tradition without adaptation is just stagnation. And when you let silence speak for you, the consequences don't wait. What's especially notable is that the palace didn't just make this move based on gut instinct or external pressure. They used data, digital monitoring, analytics, internal reports, all pointing to a growing problem that could no longer be ignored. The misinformation about Archie and Lilibet wasn't just fringe. It was mainstream, and it was impacting the monarchy's global perception. The palace had to act, not just for the children, but to preserve the very thing they spent generations trying to protect, institutional legitimacy. Because let's be real, if the public start to believe the crown won't even acknowledge its own great-grandchildren, the entire foundation starts to look shaky. Credibility can't exist in ambiguity. And in this case, ambiguity had turned toxic. That's why this moment matters so much. It wasn't about defending Harry and Meghan. It wasn't about damage control for old interviews or family tension. It was about saying, we see what's happening, and we're not going to stay silent anymore. And that shift, that subtle but unmistakable step toward accountability, that's what gives this story weight. Because this wasn't a glossy photo op. It was a response to a culture that now demands answers and no longer respects institutions that pretend they're above them. The lesson here is bigger than just one royal family. It's about how power survives in a world where information moves faster than tradition, about how leadership now means knowing when to speak, not just when to wave from a balcony, and about how protecting children, any children, from being consumed by adult drama is not just decent, it's essential. Archie and Lilibet didn't choose any of this. They didn't ask to be born into a family caught between legacy and rebellion, but their names became shorthand for an institution's unwillingness to confront reality. And now, finally, that institution has decided to show up. So where does a monarchy go from here? That depends. If this is just a one-time response to a crisis, it won't be enough. But if it marks the beginning of a more honest, more present, more transparent monarchy, then maybe, just maybe, this was a turning point. Let us know where you land on all of this. Should the palace have spoken sooner? Was the statement enough? Or is this just a carefully calculated step in a longer game? Drop a comment. Hit like if you think silence is no longer a strategy. Share with someone who's been watching the royal drama unfold. And subscribe if you want more truth behind the headlines, more breakdowns of public meltdowns, and more real talk about the stories that shape our world. Because the next scandal, it's always closer than you. And here's the real takeaway. This wasn't just a statement. It was a reckoning. For the royal family, the very foundation of their existence has always been the illusion of control. The idea that tradition, formality, and a little distance could keep chaos at bay. But what the Archie and Lilibet situation revealed, in brutal clarity, is that control is no longer given. Not in the age of digital wildfire. Not when information travels faster than truth. And certainly not when your silence is misread as secrecy. This moment, this clean, tightly worded confirmation from the palace, was them finally stepping into the present. A present where silence doesn't command respect. It invites destruction. Because let's not forget how we got here. This wasn't just about a lack of baby photos or mischristening invites. It was a complete absence of any clear royal acknowledgement. No confirmations of status. No official appearances. No corrections when the internet went off the rails. And for years, that void was filled with Archie and Lilibet photos. It's not an exaggeration to say that Archie and Lilibet became the eye of a cultural storm. Their names trended on forums and platforms that thrive on the absurd. Commentators, some with massive followings, openly speculated about their very existence, about whether they were real, whether they were being hidden, whether they were part of some sinister agenda. And the more unhinged it got, the more the palace refused to intervene. That refusal? It was seen by many as silent validation. People started to ask, why wouldn't they just say something? Why not release a simple confirmation? A photo, a public record, anything? And because there was nothing, the assumptions filled the air like smoke in a locked room. This was more than just a media crisis. It was an erosion of public trust. If the royal family wouldn't protect its own children from this kind of reputational harm, what did that say about its values? About its relevance? And again, let's be clear, this wasn't about Harry and Meghan. Love them or hate them. This wasn't their controversy to manage. They had already stepped away. They were no longer working royals. This was about the institution, the family that stayed behind, the leadership that remained, and the failure to draw even the most basic line in the sand when it came to the dignity of two children. That failure nearly cost them. Internally, it caused rifts. William and Catherine reportedly couldn't stay quiet any longer. They pushed for a response, not just to shut down the chaos, but because they saw the long-term damage it could do. Princess Anne, as always, cut through the nonsense and called out what no one else would. The silence wasn't working. It was feeding the very thing they wanted to avoid. Even King Charles, who initially leaned toward the cautious, old-school approach of saying nothing, had to face the consequences. The longer they held back, the more people assumed the worst. Segment, QC Photos, and Camilla, with all her experience navigating the public eye, warned that a response might do more harm than good, that it could reignite controversy. But in the end, they didn't have a choice. The data spoke louder than the palace walls. Digital monitoring showed the conspiracy content was getting worse. More views, more shares, more questions from mainstream press. It wasn't fringe anymore. It was bleeding into everyday public opinion. At that point, silence was no longer a shield. It was a spotlight. So the palace acted. And when they did it with intention. The statement was brief, but it hit every point it needed to. It confirmed the children's status. It made clear that their privacy matters. And it subtly but firmly pushed back against the speculation without descending into emotion or defensiveness. It said, in essence, we see what's being said. It's wrong, and we're not entertaining it any further. And just like that, 1,000 theories collapsed under the weight of reality. This wasn't just a correction. It was a moment of reclaiming authority, a moment of drawing boundaries in an age where every absence of information becomes an invitation for chaos. And the response? Immediate. Mainstream media picked it up within hours. Public sentiment shifted. People who had followed the drama closely felt a sense of closure. Those who were skeptical appreciated the clarity. Even critics of the royal family acknowledged that, finally, they had done the right thing. But it wasn't just about optics. It was about responsibility. Because when you have the kind of platform the royal family has, when your words, or lack thereof, ripple across continents, you can't afford to stay silent while children become symbols in adult wars. You can't allow two toddlers to be reduced to hashtags, theories, or battlegrounds. That's not royal discretion. That's institutional failure. This moment, as controlled as it was, marks a pivot. It shows that the palace, perhaps reluctantly, is starting to understand that leadership in this era looks different. That protecting the institution isn't just about preserving tradition. It's about adapting when the world changes around you. Because the world has changed. The monarchy is no longer protected by time zones, delayed headlines, or carefully chosen photographers. It's vulnerable to the same forces that govern every public-facing brand, online perception, digital misinformation, and a public that demands answers, not decades from now, but today. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This situation didn't need to become what it did. The palace could have avoided all of it. One early confirmation, one dignified public appearance, one direct response to the earliest false narratives. It could have stopped the spiral before it started. But instead, they stayed silent. And that silence nearly turned into a scandal they couldn't control. The good news? They finally acted. The better news? It landed. But whether this becomes a one-off or a real shift remains to be seen. Because the internet doesn't forget. Public scrutiny doesn't disappear. And Archie and Lilibet will grow up in a world where every statement, or lack thereof, has a digital footprint. The monarchy has to do better. This moment showed they can. But will they? Time will tell. But now, at least, there's a new standard. One where protecting children comes before protecting mystery. One where truth, even when uncomfortable, matters more than tradition. One where clarity is no longer feared, but expected. And now, with the palace's long-awaited words out in the world, the silence is finally broken. But the question that lingers, the one that nobody inside those royal walls really want to answer, is this: why did it take so long? It's easy to get caught up in the moment. The relief, the praise, the sighs of finally. But if you pull back the curtain even a little, you realize this entire situation was a slow-motion disaster that could have been avoided with a single decision years ago. And the fact that it wasn't, that's not strategy. That's negligence dressed up as formality. Because this wasn't a minor oversight. This was years of ambiguity around two of the most talked-about children in the world. Years of people asking the same basic questions. Where are they? Are they being acknowledged? Are they safe? And getting radio silence in return. And in that silence, the worst part of the internet did what they do best: twist, amplify, and weaponize speculation into something far more sinister. And all of it happened while the palace watched. Sure, internally, there was disagreement. We now know that William and Catherine were pushing for transparency early on. That and was warning against leaving things unaddressed. That even staff close to the digital strategy side were raising red flags. But tradition won out. The preference for restraint, for holding back, for refusing to feed the frenzy. That's what kept the walls up and the mouths shut. Except, it didn't stop the frenzy. It fed it. Because in 2025, refusal to speak isn't noble. It's provocative. And when the institution you're protecting is a crown, arguably the most public-facing, tradition-bound entity on the planet, that refusal sends a very loud message, and not the one they thought. The palace thought silence would protect the children, but all it did was make them targets. There's a fine line between privacy and erasure, and the palace, knowingly or not, tiptoed far too close to the latter. The total lack of visibility gave oxygen to the worst theories imaginable. People weren't just guessing about details. They were questioning the existence of the children. And instead of correcting the record, the monarchy sat in the shadows, hoping it would all burn out on its own. It didn't. Instead, it grew, and it warped into something so ridiculous and hurtful that the damage became unavoidable. By the time the palace acted, the public conversation had already shifted from confusion to frustration. Even people who weren't fans of the Sussexes, or who didn't follow royal gossip, were starting to ask, why aren't the children being acknowledged? Why is the palace letting this spin so far out of control? Why not say something, anything, to defend them? And when the palace finally did speak, those questions didn't just go away. They got louder. Because the truth is, a lot of people aren't applauding the response. They are wondering why it came after the internet tore the kids apart. Why it took media pressure and digital analysis to convince one of the oldest institutions in the world to do the bare minimum for two toddlers. Why no one at the top was willing to say, this isn't just embarrassing, this is wrong. The statement may have shut down the conspiracies, but it didn't erase a memory of what came before it. The months and years of speculation, the endless questions, the relentless online noise, the decision not to act again and again until the risk became undeniable. But maybe that's a lesson the monarchy needed. That in this era, you don't get to sit out the storm and hope tradition protects you. You don't get to watch your own family's children become headlines and pretend you're being above it. Because silence, in this world, isn't neutral, it's loud. And every second you don't speak, someone else is speaking for you. It's a hard lesson for a palace built on centuries of careful image management, but one they can no longer afford to ignore. The royal family is changing, whether it wants to or not. And this moment, this public, undeniable statement about Archie and Lilibet may be the clearest sign yet that the monarchy finally understands what the stakes are. That public trust isn't inherited like a title. It's owned, every day. And when that trust starts to slip, it doesn't matter how many crowns you wear or how polished your balcony waves are. What matters is whether people still believe in the values you claim to represent. Protection, duty, integrity. Because if you can't protect your own children from being dragged through online filth, then what does your moral authority really amount to? There's also the issue of timing. Not just how long it took, but why it happened now. The palace didn't suddenly decide to speak out of emotional awakening. They were pushed by mounting internal pressure, media escalation, and hard digital evidence so the narratives were spinning out of control. This wasn't a spontaneous act of compassion. It was a calculated move, a strategic shift. And that's fine. It had to happen somehow. But it's worth noting that this wasn't leadership at its best. It was leadership under duress. And while the statement was welcome, the circumstances behind it are a reminder of how far the monarchy still has to go in understanding the speed and volatility of the modern world. This episode also proves something else. The palace is watching closely. They are tracking sentiment, monitoring what people say, following the metrics. They know exactly how the monarchy is being perceived and how fast that perception can change. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It means they are learning. But it also means they knew all along how bad things had gotten. And still, they waited. It's that part, the waiting, that will stick with people the most. Not just royal watchers, not just Sussex supporters, but anyone who cares about accountability. Because when it comes to children, especially children born into a system they didn't choose, the bare minimum should never take this long. Still, credit where it's due, they finally did it. They made the statement. They took control of the narrative. They reaffirmed what should have been said from day one. Archie and Lilibet are recognized, legitimate, and off-limits. Period. And now that the word's out, maybe the focus can shift. Away from speculation. Away from conspiracy. Back toward what really matters. Protecting kids, honoring truth, and holding power to a higher standard. But if the monarchy wants to keep the trust it just barely salvaged, it can't let this be a one-time fix. It has to be a turning point, a sign that the crown is evolving, not just reacting, that it's capable of more than waiting out the storm. Let us know what you think. Was the palace's response too late, or just in time? Should they have acted sooner? Or was this the only way it was ever going to happen? Hit that like button if you think the silence went on far too long. Share with someone who's been following the chaos from the sidelines. And if you're here for all the messy moments when institutions finally face the mirror, subscribe. There's always more behind the crown than they're willing to show. And when it slips, we'll be here to break it all down.